So everyone wants to know, like, how did I measure my career? Who did I look to in terms of comparison? And I got to tell you, by the time I had arrived on the IFBB pro scene and competing in the first Mr. Olympia in 1988, the guy that I knew I had to beat, obviously, was Mr. Olympia, Lee Haney, because he'd already won it 3 times running. But the guy that I measured myself by was none other than Mass with Class, the original, Lee Labrada.
I think that it's important to keep in mind that bodybuilding is multifaceted. It isn't just the quest for the most massive man.
Lee Labrada was a 1985 middleweight national champion. That's how he turned pro. But by the time I arrived at the 1988 Mr. Olympia, Lee Labrada was a different bodybuilder. Lee Labrada was actually one of those guys that I thought, well, he's won pro shows. He's beaten bigger bodybuilders. He was the new Muhammad Makaway. If I can beat Lee Labrada, then maybe I could be the threat that Lee Haney's going to have to be concerned with. And in 1989, I sat that Mr. Olympia out. I was suffering a 1-year suspension. And we were in Rimini, Italy. And I got a chance to sit in the 4th row of that Mr. Olympia on my birthday in September 9th, 1989. And I watched Lee Labrada take 2nd place to Lee Haney. Why is that significant? Because Lee Haney, in his first Mr. Olympia and his 2nd Mr. Olympia win, was beating Muhammad Makaway, who was actually smaller than Labrada. So here I was, maybe a ½ inch, maybe to an inch taller than Lee Labrada, probably 10, maybe even 15 pounds heavier than Lee Labrada. He was 2nd in the world. So by the time I decided to make up my mind to come after Lee Labrada so that I could get to the champion, 1990 had arrived. And in Chicago, Labrada would wind up in 2nd place to Lee Haney and I would wind up in 3rd. So I narrowed the gap tremendously coming after Labrada. Why Labrada? Because he was so perfect in his shape and his symmetry and his coloring, and his posing was so polished that if I could get past him, the door would open up a little bit more for me to get to the champion. And then 1991 would roll around and I'd go on to win the Arnold Classic Championship, putting myself in the driver's seat heading into Orlando, Florida to go up against Lee Haney, who arguably was at his worst in 1990, but with the arrival of Dorian Yates, with the emergence of Vince Taylor, who was 3rd at the 1989 Mr. Olympia, I had my work cut out. And by the time the Mr. Olympia rolled around on September the 10th in Orlando, Florida, 1991, I ran out of gas. I ran out of gas. I wound up in 5th place. Guess who was in 4th place? Labrada. So here was Labrada again, holding me off from actually trying to close the door. In 1992, we would go into Helsinki, Finland. And of course, Labrada was winning pro shows because he would go on the tours. And I'm watching every move he makes because not only was he an astute businessman, but he was polished from head to toe on the covers of the magazines, very well spoken. I believe he had a degree in engineering or something. He was almost like a scientist when it came to his nutrition. He was married. He was doing the business of bodybuilding. And I thought, here I am, single, living by myself. I've got to be able to beat this guy. We wind up in Helsinki, Finland in 1992. The door's wide open for anyone to win the Mr. Olympia. And arguably, Dorian Yates, coming off a 2nd place finish in 91, was the odds-on favorite. We didn't see Kevin Levrone coming as a national champion in 91 and also winning the New York Night of Champions in 92, but Kevin would wind up in 2nd place. And of course, there he was, Lee Labrada in 3rd, and I would have to endure hearing the MC call my name out in 4th place again behind Lee Labrada. I had to do the business. So I went right back to the gym. I went right back to work. Yes, I wanted to be Mr. Olympia. Yes, I thought Dorian was beatable, and of course I thought Kevin was beatable. Kevin wasn't at his best in 92, and I thought Dorian Yates was a little bit smaller version of what he had brought in 1991. 93 was going to be the year that I was going to put Lee Labrada into retirement, and I would do everything I could. I knew I didn't need more size, but I would need more detail, because that, I believed, was the reason Labrada was getting the nod over me. So we wound up at the first Olympia in Atlanta, Georgia. And in that first Olympia, my good friend Flex Wheeler, coming off of winning the USA Championships, coming off of winning the Ironman Championships, the San Jose Pro Championships, and the Arnold Classic, Flex set his sights on Atlanta, Georgia, along with Dorian Yates, and of course, Lee Labrada. And as prejudging went on, I could see from the images that I was taking that my front double bicep didn't look as good as Labrada's. He had that pose down. I mean, he owned the front double bicep as it related to him and I. But I thought I had him in the back double bicep. I thought I had him in detail. I thought I would catch up with him in the posing round. And as fate would have it, the MC would announce in 4th place, Lee Labrada. And you would have thought that I won the Mr. Olympia in my mind as I'm standing there waiting for the final names to be called. And of course I would hear my name in 3rd place, a familiar spot, because only a few short years prior I was 3rd, so it was nothing special to me. But what was special was walking past Labrada to receive that 3rd place medallion and having him in my rear view, knowing that now I've got to get past Flex Wheeler to get to Dorian Yates.
Present the 3rd place awards to Shawn Ray.
Shawn Ray.
And I didn't feel like I lost a lot in losing to Flex. However, I thought Flex was soft in the hamstrings. He was soft in the quads in relationship to me. I was in better shape, but Flex arguably is the best genetically built bodybuilder of all time, in my opinion. So I didn't have a problem losing to Flex. And of course, Dorian Yates was a bigger, fuller version, and size was ruling the day, and he would go on to win his 2nd Mr. Olympia. But beating Lee Labrada in 1993 was significant in a lot of ways. It proved to me that one day maybe I could be Mr. Olympia because I beat Lee Labrada, and he was a 2-time first Olympia runner-up. I just had to play my cards right, wait it out, and look for the opportunity. And in 1994, I set my sights on becoming Mr. Olympia. But I would have to go through Labrada. So here we are in Atlanta, Georgia, again. Flex Wheeler had gotten into the now infamous car accident, broke his neck, near death, couldn't compete in the contest. And of course I knew that Lavroni was going to be there, and of course Dorian Yates had torn his bicep some 4 to 6 weeks out from the show. I didn't revel in that, but I knew that he wasn't going to be 100%, and he showed up and he wasn't. But the one thing I knew is that I had to make sure that Labrada, it wasn't a fluke. That Labrada, it didn't just happen, that I significantly had grown into this man-child that was going to beat Labrada again and challenge for the title. And as we came down to the wire, in 3rd place, Kevin Lavroni. And it left me and Dorian Yates to be standing there 1st and 2nd. And of course I thought I won the contest, and I'm waiting for Dorian's name to be announced. And when he said Shawn Ray in 2nd place, it was a small victory for me because I was hoping to be Mr. Olympia. But I didn't hear the name Lee Labrada, and I didn't have to compare myself with Labrada. I was in between 2 of the biggest bodybuilders in our sport, and I'd beaten them, and I only had to beat 1 more. Labrada was no longer this guy that I had to think about because he was in my rear view, and it was now all eyes on Dorian Yates. He was the champion. That's who I needed to beat. And the reality of that happening for me was just looking back at history. I look back at those years when I saw Labrada in 89 and 90 getting 2nd to Lee Haney. And I realize now here I am playing bridesmaid to the 1994 Mr. Olympia, Dorian Yates. The odds on me beating Dorian Yates were going to be 1,000,000 to 1. And in 1995, I fell back a couple of notches, but I came right back again. And in 1996, I was 2nd to the same guy, Dorian Yates, but there was no Labrada. Labrada had mysteriously disappeared from the landscape of professional bodybuilding. He'd retired. And I felt like I was responsible for Labrada's retirement, although that wasn't the truth. In my mind as a bodybuilder, I retired Lee Labrada because he came out and admitted that these guys were too big to compete with. He felt like, I'm not going to win the Olympia, so I'm done with the Olympia. And he went on to create a billion-dollar supplement industry, his own niche, Labrada Nutrition. And his whole family's working with and for him, and he's giving back to the sport of bodybuilding in more ways than he ever could have contributed as an athlete, which gives my admiration for him as a competitor and as a man even that much higher status. But for me, in the mid-90s, I felt solely responsible for the retirement of the masked with class Lee Labrada. And when I look back at how that played out, I accomplished one of my goals in my career before it was over, and that was to beat one of my idols in the form of Lee Labrada. For Generation Iron, I'm Shawn Ray.